2,000 years ago, a man living under the most powerful empire in the Western world sat down and wrote something that reads like an accusation directed personally at you. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca. The text was De Brevitate Vitae, on the shortness of life, and its opening line has not softened with age. It is not that we have a short time to live, he wrote, but that we waste a great deal of it. That is not a consolation. That is a verdict. If you have ever reached the end of a day, a month, or a year with the unsettling sense that your time went somewhere you cannot fully account for, Seneca was writing about exactly that. He was not offering comfort. He was offering a diagnosis, and the precision of it is what makes it endure. In this video, we will examine 7 of Seneca's most demanding lessons on how a human being wastes the only thing that cannot be recovered, and what he believed it meant to stop. If the Stoics' approach resonates with you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Seneca wrote De Brevitate Vitae around 49 AD, likely addressed to his father-in-law Paulinus, but the argument reaches far beyond any single recipient. He returned to these questions throughout his Epistulae Moralis, his letters to Lucilius, written in the final years of his life between 62 and 65 AD, years in which he knew, with some certainty, that Nero would eventually move against him. A man writing about time under those conditions is not writing abstractly. He is writing from within the problem. The first and most foundational of Seneca's lessons is one that contemporary culture has made nearly impossible to absorb: time is not a background condition of your life. It is the substance of your life. In Epistulae Moralis, Letter 1, the very first letter he wrote to Lucilius, Seneca opens not with a greeting but with an imperative: reclaim yourself, he says, and collect and save the time that until now has been taken from you, or has slipped away, or has been stolen. The sequence matters. Some time is taken by others. Some slips through inattention. Some is actively surrendered. What this reveals is that Seneca understood the loss of time not as a single catastrophic event but as a continuous, incremental process, one that requires no dramatic failure on your part, only ordinary negligence. This leads directly to Seneca's second lesson, which is less comfortable than the first: you already know where your time is going. He writes in De Brevitate Vitae, Section 3, that those who are busiest have the least time, and that such people, if pressed, cannot account for where their days have gone, because they have never tried to account for them. The problem is not ignorance of the mechanism. The problem is a practiced avoidance of looking directly at it, because looking directly at it produces a kind of reckoning that most people would prefer to defer. Seneca's argument here connects to the Stoic discipline of attention, what Epictetus would later call prosoche, or self-watchfulness. However, Seneca gives this discipline a specifically temporal dimension. To pay attention is, first and foremost, to pay attention to how your hours are being spent, and to refuse the comfortable fiction that tomorrow will offer a better accounting than today. This is why his letter 1 ends not with encouragement but with a warning, that while we postpone, life accelerates, and what we planned as a future act of reclamation becomes simply another thing we did not do. But understanding that time is being lost is only the beginning. What Seneca said next about the category of people most responsible for that loss is where the argument becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. Seneca's third lesson is a direct challenge to one of the most persistent assumptions of organized life, that busyness is evidence of a life well used. In De Brevitate Vitae, Section 12, he describes with considerable precision the figure of the perpetually occupied man, the man who moves from obligation to obligation, who cannot sit in silence, who fills every interval with some form of activity, and he identifies this figure not as a model of productivity but as a form of self-evasion. Such a man, Seneca writes, is not in possession of his life. He has distributed it to others in small pieces and has nothing left that he can call genuinely his own. The word he uses is negotium, business, occupation, and he sets it in deliberate contrast to odium, which does not mean idleness but rather the kind of purposeful, reflective engagement that actually constitutes a life. This distinction is among the most practically significant things Seneca ever wrote, because it maps with uncomfortable accuracy onto a condition that modern life has intensified rather than resolved. A person who responds to every message, attends every meeting, fulfills every social obligation placed upon them, and fills the remaining gaps with passive consumption has not lived a full day. They have lived a day that belonged almost entirely to other people's demands, which means that for Seneca, they have not really lived it at all. The fourth lesson follows from this, and it concerns what Seneca calls the most self-deceived of all human types, the man who believes he will begin living properly once circumstances improve. In De Brevitate Vitae, section 9, Seneca describes this figure with a kind of sorrowful precision. He is always preparing to live, never living, always arranging the conditions for a future self who will finally have enough time, enough stability, enough distance from present obligations to begin doing what actually matters. Seneca's diagnosis is that this future self never arrives, because the habit of deferral is not cured by the improvement of circumstances. It is a disposition, and it travels with the person who carries it. What this raises, and what Seneca pursues with increasing force, is the question of what a life lived in genuine possession of itself actually looks like. And his answer to that question, drawn from his reading of the past, is more counterintuitive than most people expect. One of the most striking passages in all of Seneca's writing appears in De Brevitate Vitae, section 14, and it rewards careful attention. Seneca argues that the only people who are not, in some meaningful sense, cheated of their time are those who give their hours to philosophy and the serious contemplation of wisdom, because such people, he writes, are not confined to the present moment alone. They have access to all of recorded human thought, which means they inhabit a kind of extended time that ordinary absorption in daily affairs forecloses. He then makes a claim that initially sounds paradoxical: the great thinkers of the past, Zeno, Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, are more available to you today than most of your living contemporaries, because they left behind work that does not decay, and they will receive you without pretension or interruption. This is Seneca's fifth lesson, and it is not a piece of literary sentiment. It is a practical argument for the discipline of reading seriously as an act of temporal expansion. His sixth lesson concerns the future, and it is perhaps the most psychologically precise observation in the entire corpus of his writing. In Epistulae Moralis, Letter 5, and again in Letter 13, Seneca identifies what he calls the twin thieves of the present moment: anxiety about the future and excessive attachment to what is past. However, it is the anticipatory mode, the habit of living in imagination toward a future event, a future condition, a future version of one's circumstances, that he treats with the greatest urgency, because it is the subtlest. A man absorbed in grief about the past at least knows what he has lost. A man consumed by anticipation of the future cannot even name clearly what he is waiting for, and in the meantime, the actual texture of his existing days passes unexamined and unlived. Seneca's formulation in Letter 5 is worth quoting with care. He writes that the wise man neither postpones his life to the future nor squanders what remains of the present in regret for the past, but holds both tendencies at a distance through the exercise of deliberate attention to what is actually before him. This is not, he is careful to note, a form of fatalism or passive acceptance. It is an active discipline, one that requires continuous effort precisely because the pull toward anticipation and regret is so deeply embedded in ordinary human psychology. This brings Seneca's argument to its most demanding and most practically actionable point, the lesson that binds all the others into a single coherent demand. Seneca's seventh and final lesson is the one toward which everything else in his philosophy of time has been building, and it is the one most likely to be misunderstood if encountered without context. In Epistulae Moralis, Letter 1, he writes, in one of the most direct imperatives in all of ancient philosophy, ita fac, me Lucili, vindica te tibi. Do this, my Lucilius, claim yourself for yourself. The Latin vindica carries a legal weight that the English word claim does not fully preserve. It is the language of reclamation, of asserting a right to something that has been wrongfully alienated. What Seneca is saying, with the precision of a legal argument, is that a human being can live in a condition of genuine self-dispossession, not through external slavery, but through the continuous, voluntary surrender of their attention, their hours, and their deliberate choice to other people and other demands. The seventh lesson is therefore this, that reclaiming your time is not a luxury or a personal preference. It is, for Seneca, a moral obligation, the primary obligation, in fact, because without it, no other virtue can be practiced with sufficient depth or consistency. This is why, in De Brevitate Vitae, section 18, Seneca describes the truly wise person not as someone who has more time than others, but as someone who wastes none of it, because they have identified what actually matters and organized their days around it with a kind of ruthless selectivity that most people mistake for coldness or antisociality. Seneca is not recommending withdrawal from human life. He is recommending the refusal of those human demands that arrive without genuine value and consume time that could sustain something worth sustaining. The distinction, he acknowledges, requires continuous judgment, and continuous judgment requires precisely the kind of reflective practice that his entire body of work is designed to cultivate. What this reveals, taken whole, is that Seneca's 7 lessons are not 7 separate observations about time management. They form a single, cumulative argument, that a human life is constituted by attention, that attention is finite, that most of us distribute it without sufficient care, and that the act of reclaiming it, steadily, deliberately, against considerable internal and external resistance, is not a philosophical abstraction but the most concrete and urgent work a person can undertake. The practical implication is not comfortable, but it is clear. The question is not whether you have enough time. The question is whether you are willing to treat the time you have as the irreplaceable substance it actually is. Seneca wrote these letters and essays knowing, with some certainty, that his own remaining time was limited, and that knowledge did not make them more dramatic. It made them more precise. Taken together, the 7 lessons he leaves behind form not a self-help program but a philosophical account of what it actually means to be alive rather than merely occupied, to possess your hours rather than surrender them, and to treat the present moment not as a corridor to some better future arrangement but as the only place where genuine living has ever occurred or ever will. The practical demand he places on the reader is not extraordinary. It is, in fact, simple, though simple is not the same as easy. Account for your time, select what deserves it, and refuse, with increasing clarity, what does not. The Stoics wrote for themselves, but what they left behind survived 2,000 years for a reason. Subscribe and we will keep exploring why.